Good morning, everyone. I have been privileged to bring this lesson this morning, God's covenant with Abraham. But before I start, is there anybody who likes to take notes? Are there any note takers in here? We got some note takers in here. I saw a hand over here first. I'm gonna give you this. Oh, you have something to write. Who likes to take notes and doesn't have a journal? Someone right back here. Here you go. Here's a journal for you. I just like to give stuff away. So this lesson this morning, I only had one thing to give away, Elder. I do. So maybe pray that God blesses me with something to give to you. So this lesson this morning, God's covenant with Abraham. Just a kind of a brief introduction of this lesson. We already read through Genesis chapter 15, 1 through 6, 17 through 21. And the aim of this lesson, there are really three main things that the lesson in the book wants us to capture. They're the facts, there's the fundamental truth, and then there's function. And if you got the teacher's book, it might say something a little different. I just made them all start with the same letter. So we've got facts, fundamental truth, and function. What are the facts? The facts are the two components to the Abrahamic covenant. There are two components to it. One was posterity, and the other was the promised land. Posterity being offspring, he was promised children, he was going to be made a great nation, and he was promised the promised land, as we see in our golden text. The fundamental truth is that there is a degree of faith that is necessary in order for us to believe and follow God. There's a degree of faith, and we'll see what Abram's, I'm going to call him Abe just because it's one syllable and it's a little easier for me. We're going to see the degree or the measure of faith that Abe had to demonstrate in order to believe God. And then the function, the practical part of it. How does this apply to us? Well, we need to believe and obey God. That whatever he promised is going to happen, even if the promise doesn't seem promising. Has anyone ever been there where God told you something was going to happen, a promise was made, but the promise didn't look promising? And so we're going to see through this lesson where Abe's faith is demonstrated in a way that we can follow his model. I think of a situation I had a few years back. I am in the mortgage industry, and for any of you familiar with the mortgage industry, you may have benefited from it, and you may have been negatively impacted by it. Well, when you see in the news where people are being negatively impacted and people are losing homes and people can't buy homes, well, that impacts people who need a place to live on the outside of the mortgage company, and it impacts people on the inside of the mortgage company. And so one time I was impacted. Well, I was impacted a couple times, but the second time was worse. Impacted meaning I got let go. There was not enough work to be done, and so they had to let somebody go. They let a few of us go, a lot of us, but I had to be let go. I was impacted, and I had responsibilities. Because I'm one of those people, when I'm not at work, I'm one of those people who has a house and bills to pay, just like everybody else. And I was without. I was used to making a certain income, and then all of a sudden I didn't have it. And then I got a little bit of unemployment, and they gave me a nice little severance package, which most people don't get, so that was a blessing. But then the package ran out, and the insurance ran out. And so I made my last trip to the doctor and got everything checked out, made sure I was going to be alive for the next however long it was going to take me to find another job with benefits. And I went from working in a corporate building with key card access and really good benefits and all the stuff that looks cool and was nice to have, and I even maybe took it for granted for a while. And then I ended up in a space where I was working overnight at Target, taking the stuff off the truck, putting it on the shelves, working really, really fast so that the people who like to come shop first thing in the morning, everything is on the shelf and ready for them. And let me tell you something, if you've never worked overnight, it's tiring. And, like I said, I had a house, I had a car, I had responsibilities. There were things that God had blessed me with, but now where's the provision going to come from? And it just went on and on and on. And any of you who have been without work for any period of time know that finding work, looking for work, is work in of itself. And after a while, that just got really, really exhausting. And I had kind of settled in to my job working overnight at Target. And it was still a struggle. I almost lost my house. They were about to start foreclosure proceedings. And mind you, before that, I had been the person who helped people avoid foreclosure. And now here I was in the position, potentially going to lose my house. At one point, a little bit later on down the road, they had already put the alert out for a tow truck to come and find my car. And they were sending me letters asking if they could update the information to find out where I work. I'm like, no. I'm smarter than that. But it seemed like it was taking forever. And it's like, God, what you gonna do, God? And it took a long time, and now I am employed again in the mortgage industry. And so that was something that happened a while ago. But sometimes we can be in a position of need, and we can be in a position of wanting to believe God for what he said he was going to give us. And I don't believe that, I purchased my home responsibly. I purchased my car responsibly. I didn't overdo. I wasn't one of those people who overdid it. So I did it responsibly, and I felt like I was honoring God. So it's like, okay, God, well, this is your house. So how are you going to pay these bills? What you doing? And it took a long time. And sometimes we find ourselves in these situations where the thing that God promised seems like it's not promising, like it's not ever going to come. And that was an experience I've had, and I'm sure that many of you have had a similar similar experience. But we get to the golden text, as our lesson calls it, and that's down in verse 18. It says, "On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, 'To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt, or river of Egypt, to the great river, the Euphrates.'" Just a couple details. The river of Egypt is not the Nile. The Wadi of Egypt is in the Sinai Peninsula. And even to this day, it's only about a half marathon plus a 5K away from the border of Israel. So what God told him was so accurate that it's still true today. And then just a little bit of a fact check. God said, "To your descendants." Abe didn't have no kids. So how are you going to have descendants without kids? But then also in this key verse, it says, in a couple translations, it says, "I give." And some others, it says, "have given." I give, have given. But yet here he is, you're talking about, "To your descendants, I give." That sounds like right now. "To your descendants, I have given." That sounds like it's already happened. But here Abe is still with no kids. So God is speaking from a different perspective, from a different relationship to time. God speaks the promise to come in the present and in the past. Meaning, if God says it, I'm saying it, it's already done. I've already done it. You just have to live up on it, as I've heard my pastor say. God is outside of time. And so with God, there is never a later for God. Now, he may say later to us because we're inside of time, and he's got to, chew stuff up like the mama bird, and so he can put it in our mouth so we can understand it, because we can't take the whole worm. So he has to tell us some things inside of time. But he's outside of time. He was, is to come, like it says in Revelation 1:8. So very quickly, we're going to go through 4 sections. There's only 3 in your lesson, but in my reading through it, I was like, I got to add a 4th one, and so I'm going to do it quickly so I can get all 4 of them. And the first one is the predicament. The first one is the predicament. Abe has no hair and he has no air. He's old. No hair, no air. Okay, never mind. So, I'm losing my hair. You can't tell because I just, volumizer. But there are two aspects in these first couple verses. There's the fear and there's the frustration. This fear, God comes to Abe in a vision, and he says, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid." Basically, I got you. He said, "Do not be afraid. I am your shield. I got you." That's what he says as soon as he comes to him. And that sets off this journey to this golden verse, to this covenant that God makes. And then there's the frustration, where Abe is basically saying, I am, fill in whatever age, I am X years old, and I don't have any kids. So, what is that thing for you that I am X years older? I've been doing this for this long, and this still hasn't happened. I've been doing this for this long, and this still hasn't happened. I think one thing that's important for us to do is make sure that we know what God promised us. Because I could say, I'm X years old and I'm still not a millionaire. I don't understand it, God. But God never promised me that I would be a millionaire. He just said that he'd take care of me. So I need to be clear on what it is that God actually promised, so that it can curb my frustration just a little bit. And this is in verses 1 through 3. God comes to him. He says, I got you. And then Abe says, yeah, but I don't have no kids. Like, you're going to give me gifts. You're going to bless me, but I have no one to pass it on to except my servant. And how am I going to have descendants through somebody who's not even my relative? But what's something that stood out to me is that Abe addressed God as Lord, or sovereign Lord. Sovereign Lord. Sovereign meaning he reigns over everything, and it literally means controller. So that's what he says before he says what kind of sounds like a little bit of a complaint. He's a little frustrated. Sovereign Lord, sovereign controller. And I think that's what we need to do when we approach God, even with our frustrations. You are in control. I'm coming to you acknowledging that you are in control. So whatever you say in response to me, I'm gonna trust you. So that's the predicament. He has been promised something, and he still does not have that which he was promised. And then the next part is the proclamation. Now, I know the book says the prophecy, but and this is just me myself personally. And if I'm wrong, then the pastor will correct me. But I don't know that God prophesies. I believe that God proclaims. God declares. To prophesy is to be inspired and to then say what's going to happen. But God doesn't need any inspiration because he is. So I took a little liberties there and changed that. It's a proclamation, not a prophecy. But he's telling what is coming. And this happens in verses 4 through 6. And there are 3 things here. There is the fruition, the foresight, and the faith. Now, I didn't come up with all these. I know they all start with the same letter, and I have a tendency to do that, but these are in our lesson guide. So don't look at me crazy. The fruition, the foresight, and the faith. Fruition, and this is in verse 4, Abe is going to get that which he desires, and that's literally what fruition means, which is why they chose that word to receive what one desires to attain. And so God is saying it will come to pass. It will come to pass. Then there's the foresight. In verse 5, he tells him, look up, look ahead, look up, look ahead. Sometimes when things aren't going our way, what do we tend to do? Kind of hang our heads like, well, but God, I mean, no, look up, look up. Okay, look up. And this isn't the first time he told him to look up. He told him to look up also back in chapter 13. He told him, look as far as you can see. All of that is going to be yours. Sometimes we just have to look up and to get a glimpse of what it is that God has promised us. He said, look up to the stars. And I kind of like to read into the Bible just a little bit. We have a tendency to make God like I know he's sitting on the throne, but like he's got this big white beard and he talks like Mufasa. And I don't know that he always talks like Mufasa. And so I think sometimes God is being a little funny with people in the Bible. So he says, look up and count the stars if you can. It says it. Look at it. He said, go ahead and count the stars if you can. I know you can't, which is my whole point in telling you to look up at the stars. So God was telling him, look up. Look ahead. It's there. It's forward. You can see it. I've demonstrated it. He said earlier, your descendants will number the particles of dust. You can't count those. Your descendants will number all the stars. You can't count those. What I said is going to happen. If you look around you, there are examples. There are examples, and I believe that is one of the reasons that it's important for us to share our testimony. I think it's important because God puts us on display when He does something through our lives. It's so that someone else may see their promise in you. Something that you've gotten through, something that might not even be a thing to you. It's no big deal, whatever. But for someone else, what you just kind of toss to the side might be a dream or a vision or a promise for someone else. And so we are sometimes a demonstration of God's power when we allow ourselves to be used by God. And then there is faith. In verse 6, it says, Abe believed. Abe believed, and God counted it towards him as righteousness. He simply believed. He looked up to the stars and, okay, God, I believe you. I believe you. Where is our belief at? What degree of faith do we have? When we approach God and God says something back to us, is that enough? Because it looks like right here that was enough for Abe to believe. And so is that enough for us to believe? And that's something for each of us to look at individually. Where is my belief? The last thing that God said was going to happen that has not happened, do I believe Him? And this is why. This is part why, because there's a few things. But when you look in Hebrews chapter 11, the Faith Hall of Fame, it's this belief, it's this faith that gets him there. So, okay, I believe. Then our lesson skips down to verse 17, and this is the promise. This is the promise. It's said, and it is sealed through covenant. And there are two things, and I changed these since all the rest of them started with F. I'm like, y'all got lazy. And so fusion, and I'll explain it, fusion and field. First, fusion. Covenant literally is a cut, but it's a cut that binds. Covenant is a cut that binds. The word made, when it says made covenant, the original word for that actually is cut covenant. That's where it comes from. They cut covenant, and there are some verses that explain that, and we'll jump back to them momentarily. But they cut covenant, and then the word covenant traces back. I like word studies. I'm just a nerd, so bear with me. But it goes all the way back to a word that means to clarify. A covenant clarifies. He's already been given his proclamation of what's going to happen, but then the covenant clarifies it. And so make means cut. Covenant means to clarify, to make it clear. So covenant is clear cut. Y'all familiar with that term? To me, that makes a little bit more sense than covenant. I don't usually go around talking about, this is covenantal. I understand it. It's clear cut. It gets to the point. Clear cut literally means that it is sharply defined, which we see in verse 18 and after. It is sharply defined. And it's easy to perceive or understand. And then there is this smoking fire pot and blazing torch. This is part of covenant. This is part of how covenant works. But this is God walking through. And we see this somewhere else. We also see this in Exodus 13 and 21, where we see fire and smoke, or fire and a cloud, when God was leading the Egyptians out of Egypt. They had what? What by day? It had a cloud by day and fire by night. And so God appearing to Abe like this as fire and as smoke, this is the representation of God, and God passes through these animals that he had cut. That was one of the things that was necessary in covenant, or to make a covenant in those times, is you cut these animals in half, and the people who were making covenant would walk through them. And so when God came in the form of that fire and that smoke and passed through them, he was making covenant with Abe the same way that people made covenants with each other. So he came and demonstrated, again, in a way that would make sense to Abe. So covenant makers would walk through these cut animals, and that would seal whatever was said. Whatever was agreed upon was sealed as walking through. And one thing I read said that if you broke the covenant, you could get cut. It was that serious. Like, all right, now, if you walk through here, don't walk through here if you're not serious. Don't walk through here if you're not serious. Don't call me in for an interview if you already done hired somebody. Don't pursue me in a relationship, men, if you're not serious about a relationship. Because if you mess me over, you're going to get cut. That's clear. It's clear cut. And it will be a clear cut if you don't follow through with this covenant that you made. So we saw we saw at the beginning that there was the predicament, what Abe's issue was, and then we saw that the proclamation that God made, and then at the end we see the promise. But what I discovered was missing, and it's kind of obvious what's missing because we skip over some verses. Our lesson skips over some verses for time's sake. It's not enough space on the page for all the verses. I get it, and we can get the point, but it kind of makes it look like it's like that's all there is to it. And how many of you have heard the cliche, God said it, that settles it? If you said that, you's a lie. That's not how it works for us. Oh, God said it. That's it. I'm good. And it gives this, if we jump from verse 6 to verse 17, it gives the illusion that that's all that happened. Like, and Abe believed. And then God made covenant. But what I found happened in verses 7 through 16 is, and this is another P word, process. There was a process. We would be mistaken to believe or to think that just because we believe, that's it. There was a process. Well, what is this process? And I'm going to go through it quickly. So there was the finding out, there was follow through, and forbearance. Find out, follow through, forbearance. Find out. Verse 8. Find out. So here, so in verse 6 it says, and Abe believed, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And then God threw in there, yeah, because I brought you from where you were to where you are right now. Like God just went ahead and threw that in there. Like you better believe after all I've done for you so far, you better believe it. And then verse 8 starts with this word that tends to nullify whatever was said before it. It says, but Abe said, I get that, but how can I know? And so it sounds like is that doubt, or is he turning back on his belief? I don't think so. I think it's part of the process, because verse 6 says that he believed, and what I see him saying in verse 8 is, I believe you, but how can I know? I believe you, but how can I know? Then there's follow through. There's some follow through. In verse 9, God's response, when he says, how can I know? God's response was covenant. Covenant is how you know. How can I know? I will demonstrate to you, because we are going to cut covenant. Blood will be shed, and we will pass through this thing. And if one of us doesn't uphold our end of the bargain, somebody's going to get cut. And so that's how you can know, is because I'm going to make covenant with you. And so in verse 10, Abe comes with the follow through. He comes with the follow through. He obeyed. He took the answer that God gave him, and he did what he was told. He took the answer that God gave him, and he did what he was told. Well, what was he told? God's response was, go get me these animals. Go get these animals. And there's no conversation between God saying, go get these animals, and the next verse 10 says, and he got the animals, and he cut them, and he laid them out, but he didn't cut the birds. Now, did you see in verse 9 at all where God said, cut these animals? It's not there. It's not there. So somehow Abe knew what to do. Then, and I'm going to get to that. There's then the forbearance. Forbearance is a waiting period. Forbearance is a waiting period. So he found out. He wanted to find out. He wanted to know. He believed, but he wanted to know. And then he followed through by obeying what God told him. And then he forbeared. He waited. And it actually says he waited so long. It says the buzzards came to get the cut carcasses. So the birds had come to get, and he shooed them off. No, this is for God. Get out of here. So they were out there long enough for the birds to come out there to try to get him. And then it says the sun started to go down. How many of you have ever been waiting on somebody waiting on a ride? Somebody's supposed to pick you up, and the sun starts to go down. I'm like, where they at? I know me myself personally, I grow impatient. Like, excuse me. Start sending text messages with punctuation. When I get to sending text messages with all proper punctuation, I'm serious. Ain't no emojis or nothing. I'm serious. I grow impatient. But Abe, he waited. He forbeared. So how did Abe know what to do in verse 10, where God said, go get these animals, and then he got them and started doing stuff with them? Well, there's a context for covenant. Abe already has a context for covenant, and I'm going to speed through it, and you're going to have to go and read it on your own. But first, this illustration, this might help you. This might help you get it. You ever, as a child, wanted to go somewhere with your friends, and you asked, like, can I go to such and such? They going to the mall, or they going to the movies, and what's the answer you usually want? Yes. Yes, don't be shy. Talk back to me. The answer we usually want is yes. Well, sometimes we don't get a yes. Sometimes we get an instruction. Have you ever been in a situation where you say, can I go to such and such? Or, hey, we going, but I don't have any money to see the movie with my friends. And your mama says, go get my purse. You know what that means? What's that mean? She about to give me some money. Go get my purse. Okay. About to go. Well, that's basically what God said to Abram. God, I believe you, but how can I know? And God said, go get my purse. So Abe had to be excited. I'm believing at this point he's excited. That's why he waited. That's why he's like, get the birds out of here. Like, hey, I got the purse. And she hadn't dug in it yet, but she about to pull out some coins or some paper money so I can go and do what she said I could do. So if we go back and real quickly, I'm going to run through this. In chapter 14, this is where we see, right before this, we see that Abe has a context for covenant. So he already understood what covenant meant. And he knew what it meant when God said, go get these animals. So he went and got them and he was ready. And he knew it because in chapter 14, there's some battles, there's some fights, there's some wars. You can read through it. So there's one war and these people beat these people and then they went and they beat somebody else. And then when they beat those people, Lot, if you're familiar with the story of Abraham, Lot is Abe's nephew. And somebody ran up and said, hey, they captured everybody. I got away. But man, they got your boy. They got Lot. And so where the guy came to talk to him was in this place that belonged to somebody else, even though in 13, God said he was going to give him his own place, but he was staying with some other folks. Anyways, these people, these three brothers, it says in 14, verse 13, it says that they were his allies. Well, ally in that context means possessors of the covenant. So these people he was staying with, these three are brothers and he's not related to them, but they all have a covenant together. They are his allies. And so you get all the way through it. So Abe, he has an army because he got it like that. And they go and he rescues Lot and all the people and gets all the stuff and all that stuff. And they come back and there's some more stuff. And then you get all the way down to verse 24. And the king of Sodom is saying, hey, give me back my people. You can keep all this stuff. And Abe's like, no, I made a vow to God. God said he was going to do something for me. And so I'm not about to let you give me stuff so that you can say you made me rich. It's like, so just give me what I need for my people to eat and give the fair share to my allies that came with me. Allies that came with me. And then it names those three brothers. So these three brothers who he was staying with, they had covenant. And it was Abe's nephew, not their nephew. But they went with them to fight this battle because they were in covenant. And then at the end, when it was all said and done, once the victory had been won and there were spoils of war, the people who were in covenant with him, even though it wasn't their battle, they got a cut of the spoils. And so his context for covenant is, this is what happened for me. Not that long ago, I was in covenant with somebody and I had a battle. It wasn't their battle, but they fought my battle. In covenant, when we enter into a covenant with God, he fights our battles. And then at the end, they get a share. The allies, the possessors of the covenant, they get a portion. So this is what Abe knows. God said, go get my purse. Go get these animals. I'm about to enter into covenant with you. He knows what covenant looks like because he just experienced it. So he's got to know that whatever God is about to do, he's about to partner with me. But before it was just a promise, and now it's about to be a partnership. Now I'm about to have somebody to fight my battles for me. Now I'm about to have somebody who when he's got something, when he has a victory, he's going to share it with me. That was Abe's context for covenant. So very quickly, and then I'm going to get out your way. There are 7 things that Abe did that we can also do. Real quick, and let's just go straight through the text. In verses 2 and 3, he petitioned God. Number 1, he petitioned God. Then in verse 6, he believed God. Then in verse 8, he inquired, I believe you, but how can I know? Then he obeyed God in verse 10. 11 through 12, he waited on God. Then he received the vision from God. And then that covenant, he accepted the covenant. He accepted the covenant. He petitioned God. He believed God. He inquired of God. He obeyed God. He waited on God, received a vision from God, and accepted covenant with God. One quick thing about a covenant. I heard this this pastor preacher that I like. His name's Dr. Darius Daniels. He said, when you make an agreement, a covenant with someone who can't do anything for you, you're doing them a favor. What could Abe do for the sovereign controller? He could do those things I just listed, but really, God didn't need Abe, so God was doing him a favor. Well, favor. What do I know about favor? Well, favor, unmerited favor, is grace. Covenant with God is grace. He enters into covenant with us to show us grace. He don't need us, we need him. He demonstrates his grace. In the new covenant, because we don't have Abraham's covenant. So this text is not about you having a kid and you getting a bunch of land that turns into a country. The new covenant is salvation. Jesus was cut. There was blood that was shed. And then we can do like Abe did at the end, accept the covenant. All we have to do is accept the covenant that was made by the cut Jesus, the shed blood of Jesus, and then we, through that covenant, can receive grace. There was a predicament. There was a proclamation. There was, now we know, a process. There's a process. And then God sealed the promise with the covenant.